All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to the channel. This is Tyler King with the Denver Gazette, back to preview another Colorado Buffaloes football game. Apologies everybody about the audio issues with the video, the post game video from the BYU game. Not sure. I think my mic might have died during the middle of it, and that kind of ruined the audio for the entire thing. So unfortunately, didn't have that one up there on the channel, but obviously. Got all that stuff fixed. We'll have post game video after this week's game down in Fort Worth against TCU. It's a pretty special game for Coach Prime and the Buffs. Returning to the site of that first win in 2023, Coach Prime's debut. That epic game. Buffs were 3 touchdown underdogs in that game. Were able to come out with the win in pretty dramatic fashion with Travis Hunter showing out, Shedeur Sanders showing out, all those guys kind of proving themselves and proving why Coach Prime was hired, basically, and kind of quickly establishing this era of Colorado football. So, I was obviously at that game, excited to get back down to TCU's campus, to Amon G. Carter Stadium, which is a really nice stadium there on their campus. So excited for this week's game, and looking forward to what should be a really tough game for the Buffs, as I've talked about on the channel before. I mentioned that at the end during the video at the end of the BYU game, but obviously that the audio got cut out there, like I said. But this will be a really tough challenge for the Buffs, and one they haven't faced yet this season, with a really powerful, explosive TCU offense that relies on the passing game, where the Buffs have faced a bunch of teams that are run heavy so far this season, just like like last week against BYU. So we got somebody to preview this game with us this week, and it is Steven Johnson with the Fort Worth Star Telegram. Steven, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing all right, man. I hope this guy outside blowing leaves is too loud. Is my audio okay?
Yep, you sound great. Appreciate you doing this, man. What has been your kind of biggest takeaway for TCU so far this season? Obviously, they had the 3-0 start, lost on a game-winning field goal last week at Arizona State. Just kind of what has been your big takeaway from watching the Horned Frogs so far this year?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway, I think Josh Hoover didn't have his best game last week, but I think overall he's kind of taken a bit of a leap. I think coming into the season, he was really grossly underrated, honestly. If you think about it, a guy that in his first year as a starter set a program record, led his team to 9 wins. If he played for A&M, Texas, or whatever, this guy would have been coming in already in the Heisman race. But his mobility outside the pocket, his mobility and accuracy outside the pocket has really stood out in the first 4 games of the season, regardless of what happened last week. I've been very impressed with how TCU's been able to replace 3 NFL receivers. Eric McAllister, Jordan Dwyer, Joseph Manjack have all pretty much stepped in and filled whatever production was left behind from Savion Williams, Shaq Best, and J.P. Richardson. And I do think the numbers don't exactly say, but I do think they have a better defense than last year. The fact that Arizona State didn't run away with that game last week was a credit to the defense, who really kept TCU in control until the final quarter, when the offensive line just couldn't block that Sun Devils defensive front. So on the positive end, those are the 3 things that stand out. But on the negative, I got to say they have a couple injuries right now. But I think the main thing is we still don't know how good this offensive line is for TCU. They showed some signs of weakness in that second half against SMU, but did enough to get the job done. Then last week, 6 sacks, only 10 rushing yards. Even if you remove all the quarterback sack yardage, the running back still only had 50 yards on 15 carries, I believe. So this is a prove-it game for the offensive line. If they can't establish a run game against Colorado, I think there's going to be a shakeup with TCU starting 5.
Yeah, that's kind of been the theme all year, is kind of whatever the opposing offense has wanted to do against the Buffs, they've been able to do. Whether it was Georgia Tech with the running game, BYU last week, the running game. Houston did a little bit of both, run and pass pretty well against the Buffs. So maybe that's kind of the recipe that TCU is looking for success. You obviously mentioned Josh Hoover, a guy who I was high on, really high on coming to the year. I remember back at Big 12 Media Days writing about how good the quarterbacks were in this conference. And for me, Josh Hoover was right up there with the likes of Sawyer Robertson. Obviously, Sam Levitt at Arizona State is one of the best in this conference. You mentioned him taking a leap this year, some of that throwing on the move outside the pocket. Just how much of a different guy does he feel like within the program? Like, is it his team right now? And like, is the program going to go as far as he can carry them this year? Basically, is what I'm trying to ask.
Well, he's definitely the face of the program, and he kind of definitely stepped into that role when he turned down a very lucrative offer from Tennessee. I think they were, offering him a 7-figure raise. Obviously, a chance to go play in the SEC. So when he turned that down, I think he cemented himself as the face of the TCU program, of the Sonny Dykes era Horned Frog. So he's always been a guy that's kind of had the respect of the locker room, respect of the coaches, respect of the staffers. So none of that has really changed. But I think he's getting more mature. I think he's really leaning into being the face of TCU and honestly being the face of Fort Worth.
And you mentioned obviously last week some of the offensive line struggles. The first three games TCU is able to score 35 or more points. Does it feel like that 30 number is kind of what they're going to be aiming at? If they get to 30, they're going to be tough to beat in any game this year.
I would think so. And that number, that's just not for the total points on the scoreboard. That's also for their rushing totals. I think ideally TCU, I know TCU has a reputation of being an air raid team, but, at their best, like in 2022, TCU had a dominant run game. And honestly, they've had a run game except for the last really 2 seasons. So Sonny Dice said ideally they would like to run the ball 35 to 40 times a game. And I think that's actually where Hoover's at his best. If you can keep his attempts around 30, let him go, let's say 23 of 30, 22 of 30. That to me is where Josh is at his most efficient and at his most dangerous when he doesn't feel like he has to carry the offense by himself. So 30 points, 30 carries, 30 passing attempts. If TCU is around those numbers, that means they have a balanced game plan and the offensive line is doing a good job, both in pass pro and run blocking. So I would definitely circle the number 30 across the board. And if TCU gets to those plateaus, get to those thresholds, I should say, they'll feel pretty good about walking out of there with a victory.
You mentioned injuries as well. Obviously, the Buffs still have a very lengthy injury report. Most of the guys that are going to be out, that are already ruled out for this week's game, are not much of a surprise. Some of them are key contributors, like R.G. Johnson at cornerback. Obviously, the two running backs, DeKalen Taylor, Simeon Price. They would love to have Tawfiq Thomas and Gabriel Lightfoot at defensive tackle. They're just really thin there right now. The only one I would keep in mind or look out for to see if he improves at all is Anquin Barnes, defensive tackle. He's listed as doubtful right now, but everybody else feels like they'll be probably good to go, and not too many concerns there. Obviously, the names that jumped out to me on the TCU side are both Eric McAllister, the wide receiver you mentioned, and running back Kavorian Barnes, listed as questionable. What is the level of concern for TCU right now with both those guys potentially not being able to go?
Well, I think there's optimism. Kavorian Barnes will be able to play on Saturday. He practiced on Tuesday in the red no contact jersey. We saw him yesterday. He was out of that red no contact jersey. So I think if he does play, it'll be on a limited basis, maybe 5 to 10 carries. But he is seemingly trending in the right direction. And I think they need kind of that power in the running back room. McAllister, I'm told, is more of like a pain threshold thing. So it's really hard to say whether he's going to play or not. I didn't see him playing yesterday. He kind of gutted through about 15 or so plays against Arizona State. So I would not be surprised if he dressed out and at least tried to play the first series. But I think if either one of them play, I don't think either one will be 100%. So they're trending in the right direction. But honestly, the biggest thing on the injury report that was a bit of a surprise was Ansel-Din Mabah, the defensive tackle. He's a starter for TCU, has 1.5 sacks on the season, kind of a disruptive force in the middle. And TCU has kind of been praising some of the defensive line depth they've been kind of building over the last couple of years. So now that depth will really be tested. And that was a big reason they struggled last year because they didn't have the bodies at D tackle. So now they lose a key piece. They already lost another guy that could have been a potential starter, and Mike. I don't even want to mispronounce his name. So they're without a couple guys on the defensive line. They'll be without a starter, but it does look like their leading rusher and leading receiver. There's a chance they could play in a limited capacity.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the other guys, especially in the passing game, like Jordan Dwyer obviously had a big week 1 against North Carolina. Joseph Manjack played really well last week. The Buffs have really struggled with, especially really at all the DB spots have kind of struggled this year, especially deep downfield. The Buffs have given up plenty of pass interference calls, and they've been caught. Deep downfield with guys getting beat in man coverage, which they like to play a lot. I mean, how much of an impact could Dwyer and Manjack play in this week's game?
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see how Colorado plays TCU's receivers because early in those games you mentioned, Eric McAllister attracted so much attention. The term I use is a word they use a lot with Steph Curry, and it's just gravity, like how much he pulls the defense towards him. So they won't have that. Regardless if he plays or not, I think Colorado will know this isn't the same McAllister that went for 250 yards against SMU. So how does Colorado adjust to that? Do they play more press coverage, be more aggressive? But I think both players are certainly capable. Manjack is on pace to have a career year. He's kind of I can't even call him a prototypical slot. He's a big slot, man. He's like 6'2", 6'3". He's hard as hell to bring down once after the catch. So I think he can have a big day. And Jordan Dwyer, he did not have his best game against Arizona State. Had a couple drops, offensive pass interference that I think kind of made a drive stall out, and he also had a bobble that led to a turnover on the goal line. So I think he's the guy that could have a breakout. And I shouldn't even say breakout game. I should think he'll have a bounce back game. He'll primarily be the number one target, and the guy that has to step up for TCU is Dozie Ezukanma. He's a redshirt freshman. He'll be starting, or he'll be playing in place of Eric McAllister, and they are super high on Dozie's ability. He only had one catch last week, but both Malcolm Kelly, the wide receiver coach, and Sonny Dice set the film, showed Dozie getting open a lot, and I think Josh will be looking his way. And one more name to give you is tight end DJ Rogers. I think he's really underrated. He's both great with some of those contested catches, and then he's also great after the catch as well, too. So TCU has capable receivers outside of McAllister, but it's just going to be interesting to see how the defenses changes, how they play those receivers, knowing McAllister isn't itself yet.
And I obviously want to flip the sides here and ask a little about this defense. You mentioned them being down a key guy on the defensive front. Who are some of the standouts to you so far defensively for TCU? Obviously, Caleb Elamzor has had a pretty solid start. You got the two solid safeties. I've always been a fan of Nnamdi Obiazer. Just kind of who has stuck out to you so far with this group defensively?
Well, Caleb Elamzor, I think you got to start with him. These last 2 weeks against the two toughest opponents TCU has faced, he's really stepped his game up. Over 20 tackles the last 2 weeks, and I think maybe 3 sacks as well, too. So I think he's really the type of linebacker you're really going to see in the Big 12 for the compactly spread offense. Can run sideline to sideline. You can put him at edge, let him get after the passer. He's great as a QB spy. So I think he's earned a lot of money. I think he's moving up NFL draft boards, and I know our eyes will be on him in another kind of a national TV game this week. Bud Clark, I think, obviously he's the all Big 12 preseason safety, still one of the best safeties in America. I think they want to see a little more discipline out of him. Look, he's a playmaker, he's a ball hawk, so he's going to take those chances. But there's been a couple times he's taken some of those risks. It hasn't completely bit them in the back yet, but there's been a couple times he's mistimed some of those passes, man. And you know those can easily lead to chunk plays, and I think there was some confusion on that last touchdown by Arizona State. So he's another guy, just like Jordan Dwyer, I think will bounce back and have one of his best games of the season on Saturday. Elsewhere, I do like kind of the development of Jamel Johnson. I think he could be that leader of the defense next year. He has a couple picks this year, great in run support. And Zach Chapman and Marcus Dill on the defensive line, I think, are two of the standouts. These are two guys that are going to step up even more because Ansel will be out. So I think Zach Chapman, Marcus Dill, Caleb Elamzor, and definitely those two safeties, Bud Clark and Jamel Johnson, the guys I think are leading the way on defense.
Now, obviously, TCU has struggled to defend the pass so far this year. I think that right now they're second last in the conference, only ahead of Oklahoma State in terms of passing yards allowed per game. It feels like a good matchup for them maybe this week against a Buffs defense that is probably going to want to establish the run with a dual threat quarterback and Caden Salter. They were definitely at their best last week in that first quarter against BYU, where they were using some of that RPO offense and really getting the ground game going, even using some wildcat formations with wide receiver Draylon Miller, who's lining up in the backfield a little bit too. What is kind of the best, or does this feel like maybe a good matchup for the TCU defense against a Buffs offense that is going to try to slow the game down a little bit and run the ball?
I think so, and I think some of those numbers with the passing yards, TCU has led for most of the games they've been in, and they've done
that's a good point.
And their run defense, I think, has been much. I mean, Arizona State got them pretty good last week, but overall, their run defense has been a lot better. If you look at their stats last year, it was almost the reverse. You know, teams were running all over TCU, but only throwing for maybe 200 yards passing. So, you take away one thing, you give up the other a little bit. So I don't think they're as bad against the pass as maybe their numbers suggest, but I do think this is a good matchup. I've watched Salter a lot this year. Compared to Kevin Jennings and Sam Levitt, I don't think he's in that tier of quarterback. Obviously, he's dynamic, but TCU has a lot of experience playing dual threat quarterbacks this year. And I don't think Salter is as accurate on the move as Levitt or Jennings is. So I do think this is a good opportunity. I think TCU's defense played well to me last week, considering all the struggles offensively. But if there is a time for a quote-unquote bounce-back game, I do think this game against Colorado matches up well with what they want to do. They want to be able to stop the run, stop that QB run. And I do think I think their secondary matches up well with Colorado's receivers. So I know Caden Salter's kind of looking for some confidence. I was watching that BYU game, and there were some times, especially late, where it didn't look like he wanted to pull the trigger. So I know he's seeking confidence, but I think TCU matches up really well with Colorado. And I think they kind of learned some lessons from that Arizona State game. You'll see even more a more disciplined approach with containing the quarterback and maintaining those rush lanes.
All right, this has been some great insight here from Steven Johnson, who covers the Horned Frogs. Before I get you out of here, Steven, you got a prediction for this game? Obviously, TCU is a 13.5 point favorite at home. It's 6:30 p.m. local time kickoff down there in Fort Worth. 5:30 here in the Mountain Time Zone on Fox. Should be a fun game. What are you expecting to? How are you expecting this game to play out?
I had TCU winning by a couple scores in the preseason. I'm going to stick with that for now, but I do think it'll be a little bit closer. I got TCU winning 34-23 over Colorado. I think they'll maybe need a late stop or a late score in that fourth quarter to kind of stretch things out to pull away from Colorado. I don't think they'll cover, but I do think TCU wins by double digits.
I think TCU wins by double digits, but I have them just barely covering. I'm going to go 38-21 TCU. I just really do not trust the Buffs defense to get enough stops in this game. I think the offense will be able to move the ball at times, but they're going to be a rush heavy offense, going to try to control the game on the ground early. But I think it'll kind of slip away from them in the second half, and you'll see Josh Hoover and his wide receivers kind of make some big plays down the field, especially in that second half, like I said. So I've got 38-21 TCU. This is always a game that jumped out to me that was going to maybe not define Colorado season, but be one that tells a lot about what's going forward for the Horned Frogs. Just kind of how important is this game? Just kind of getting back on track in the Big 12 and setting up what they've got coming the rest of October and then in November as well.
Oh, it's vital. It's a must-win game for TCU, especially if you want to contend for a playoff spot, contend for the Big 12 title game. You already lost one to Arizona State. I had TCU losing that game in the preseason, so that wasn't a complete surprise. But you still got Iowa State. You still got BYU. I think you go to Houston. And you also got a rivalry game in Baylor. So
yep.
You don't want to blow I won't call it a mulligan, but I think if you're 10-2, I think you can still make the playoff, especially if you win the Big 12. So you don't want to use another one of those losses against Colorado when you still got a brutal schedule. You also go to K-State. I know they're not as good as they were, but Manhattan is still Manhattan, man. So TCU still has some very tough games. And if they don't win this one, man, I think they got to forget about contending. They'll have to kind of figure out what's their path to get into a bowl game, because I do think that back half of the schedule is just absolutely brutal.
It's the same for the Buffs. I said that last week, when they had that missed opportunity against BYU. It's going to be tough for them to get to a bowl game, and they got a tough schedule coming up even after this, with Iowa State coming to Boulder next week. They've got a bye, but then they have to go to Salt Lake City to play a Utah team that's always been tough for them. So appreciate you doing this, Steven, and I'll see you Saturday night in the press box.
Yes, sir, man. Appreciate the invite.
All right, that'll do it from today's video. Thanks everybody for watching, and thanks again to Steven Johnson from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram for joining us to break down and preview this Colorado TCU game coming up on Saturday night. Like I said, 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time on Fox. I will be down there in Fort Worth for full coverage with the Denver Gazette on denvergazette.com. So make sure to stay tuned for all my usual game day preview stuff, and then after the game, full coverage as well, and another video coming on the field after the game. So thanks everyone for watching. Make sure to like the video, comment, let me know what you guys are thinking heading into this big Buff games, and subscribe to the channel to never miss an episode.